There is a small wooden sign in Yellowstone National Park that almost nobody stops for. It sits beside a road, half shaded by pines. Tourists slow down, take a photo, and drive on toward the geysers. It reads Continental Divide. That sign is the most important object in the American West, and it is the only thing that matters in this story. Not the caldera, not the magma, not the ash maps you've seen 100 times. Just that line. Because everything on one side of it flows toward the Pacific. Everything on the other side flows toward the Gulf. And every drop of it starts here, on top of a supervolcano. Yellowstone is not a volcano that happens to sit in the mountains. It is the water tower for a third of this country. 3 of the great river systems of North America are born inside that park or on its shoulder. The Snake, running west into the Columbia. The Yellowstone, the Madison, the Gallatin, running east to build the Missouri. And just south of the caldera rim, the snowfields that feed the Green River, the largest tributary of the Colorado. 7.5 million people drink water that begins within 100 miles of that sign. So here is the part almost nobody covers. You do not need to be buried by Yellowstone to be destroyed by it. You only need to be downstream of it. And when it moves, those cities do not lose their water all at once. They lose it in an order, a sequence. A list with a first name on it and a last name on it. This is that list. 7 cities counted down. And number 1 is not the town you're thinking of. Before we start the countdown, you need the rule. Because this order isn't a guess. Every city on this list gets its position from 3 things, and only 3. How fast the ash reaches its watershed. Whether its water comes from snow, from a river, or from deep underground. And how many days of storage it has in the tank before empty means empty. That's it. That's the whole mechanism. Distance, source, buffer. And to understand why those 3 things are so lethal, you have to understand what volcanic ash actually is, because it is not what most people picture. Ash is not soot. It is not soft. Under a microscope, it is shattered glass. Angular, abrasive fragments of pulverized rock, most of them finer than sand. Now, put that in a municipal water system. A treatment plant is a machine designed to filter ordinary silt out of ordinary water. It is not built for a sky full of powdered glass. Turbidity spikes past anything the equipment was rated for. Filters clog in hours, not days. Intake screens block solid. And pump impellers, spinning thousands of times a minute against abrasive grit, grind themselves apart from the inside. We are not theorizing. In 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted. A far smaller mountain, a far smaller footprint. And across eastern Washington, town after town watched its water system stagger under exactly this problem, crews digging out plants while residents lined up for emergency supplies. Now take that and stretch it across 5 states. There's a second problem, and it's chemical. Fresh ash arrives coated in soluble compounds, sulfates, chlorides, fluoride. Rain strips them off the ash and carries them into the reservoirs and onto the pasture. After major eruptions elsewhere in the world, fluoride released this way has poisoned livestock across entire districts. So even the water you can physically pump has to be tested and cleared before anyone is allowed to drink it. And then there's the third problem, the one that decides this entire list. The American West does not store its water in reservoirs. It stores it in snow. Mountain snowpack is the region's actual tank. It piles up all winter and releases slowly through summer, feeding the rivers exactly when the cities need them. It works because snow is white. White reflects sunlight. Reflection means slow melt. Cover that snow in gray ash and it stops reflecting. It starts absorbing. Every snowfield in the northern Rockies begins melting faster than it should, all at once. Which means the first thing the West gets is not drought, it's flood. Rivers running high and gray, arriving weeks early, carrying glass. And then, once that surge drains to the sea, the tank is empty in the middle of July with nothing left behind it. Flood, then famine, out of the same snowbank. Hold on to that, because it's about to decide who survives and who doesn't. One more thing before the countdown. Some places don't get a number. The towns inside the caldera's shadow, Jackson, Wyoming, and the small communities ringing the park, are not on this list because there is no sequence for them. Their intakes, their treatment plants, and their power lines fail in the opening hours. They don't lose water in an order, they just lose it. Everyone else has time. A little. Let's count it. Number 7, Portland and Seattle. Start here, because this is the one that makes people sit up. The Pacific Northwest is upwind, hundreds of miles from the caldera. Nothing falls on it, not a flake. And it's still on the list, because the Snake River drains out of the Yellowstone highlands and pours into the Columbia, and the Columbia is the machine that powers that entire corner of the country. Sediment-choked water and abrasive grit moving through hydroelectric turbines does not care which direction the wind was blowing that morning. Here's what most people never think about. Water in a modern city does not arrive at your tap on its own. It's pumped. Pumps need electricity. So when the dams that generate that electricity start failing, it stops mattering whether the water in your reservoir is clean, because nothing is moving it to your house. Portland and Seattle keep their rain. They lose their leverage. Number 6, Denver and the Front Range. Cheyenne, Casper, Rapid City, Denver. These cities sit east and southeast of Yellowstone, which happens to be exactly where the prevailing winds across this region push. They aren't close enough to be buried. They are close enough to be dusted, and dusting is all it takes when your entire water supply is a snowpack you can't wash off. They get the pattern we just described in its purest form. An early, filthy surge in spring. Reservoirs full of water no plant in the region can process fast enough. And then a long, silent summer with nothing coming down the mountain because the mountain already emptied itself in April. Number 5, Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles. This is where the story stops being regional. Look south of the caldera at the mountains on Yellowstone's shoulder. That snow becomes the Green River. The Green becomes the single largest tributary of the Colorado. And the Colorado is the artery keeping Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Southern California alive. Ash on those snowfields becomes sediment in that river. Not in a week, over years. And here's why they rank this high despite being 1,000 miles away. They have no slack left. The Colorado is already running through the driest stretch in roughly 1,200 years. Lake Mead is already a bathtub with a white ring around it. 40 million people are already fighting over a river that was overpromised a century ago and can no longer keep those promises. A healthy system absorbs a shock. A system already at the edge does not. So the Southwest doesn't get an emergency. It gets an acceleration. Every deadline it was quietly dreading arrives early. Number 4, Boise. Boise is far enough west to dodge the worst of the ashfall. It will not be buried. It will be strangled from upstream. Everything Boise depends on comes down out of the affected highlands. The Snake River system that feeds the region. The irrigation that keeps southern Idaho's farmland productive. The hydropower that runs the pumps. Boise is the clearest example of the lesson in this entire video. Your safety is not determined by where you stand. It's determined by where your water was born. And that raises the question that decides the top 3. If proximity isn't what kills you, what does? The answer is buffer. How many days of water do you actually have when the river turns to gray sludge? For almost every city we've named, the answer is some. Groundwater, reserves, alternate intakes, something. For the last 3, the answer gets much shorter. Number 3, Billings, Bozeman, and Great Falls, Montana. Directly downstream, on rivers born inside the park, the Yellowstone River, the Madison, the Gallatin. These cities built their water systems around those rivers because those rivers have always been there. Clean, cold, and reliable, straight off the mountain. Within the first day, that same reliability becomes the problem. The gray water arrives at the intakes of the only rivers they've ever needed. There is no second river. there was never a reason to build one. Number 2, Idaho Falls, Pocatello, and Rexburg. Eastern Idaho sits on the Snake River Plain, downstream of the caldera and squarely in the likely path of the ash. They lose surface water in the opening day. That's the fast half. The slow half is worse. Beneath that plain is the aquifer that recharges from the river above it, the groundwater that irrigates one of the most productive farm regions in the country. Surface contamination doesn't stay on the surface. It works down. So these cities don't just lose their tap. They lose the backup they would have fallen back on, and they lose the farmland that backup exists to serve. Which brings us to number 1, and it is not a town near the park. It's a metropolitan area of well over 1 million people, roughly 300 miles from the caldera, that most people would call comfortably safe. Salt Lake City. Here's why it's first. Salt Lake City draws its water almost entirely from snowmelt in the Wasatch Range, in the canyons rising directly above the city. Not from a deep aquifer, not from a distant diversion with alternatives. From snow on the slopes you can see from downtown. Now put the wind on the map. The prevailing flow across this region runs east and southeast out of Yellowstone. That line runs straight down the Wasatch Front. So the ash doesn't attack Salt Lake City's pipes. It attacks its source. Every acre of that snowpack turns gray. It absorbs sunlight instead of reflecting it. It dumps early, dirty, and all at once into canyon streams, feeding treatment plants built for clean mountain runoff. And when that surge is gone, the tank above the city is bare in midsummer, in a desert valley, in a state already managing long-term drought and a drying Great Salt Lake. Largest population, most direct wind path, single water source, almost no buffer. That combination is why a city 300 miles away loses its water before towns a fraction of the distance from the crater. That's the list. 7, Portland and Seattle. 6, the Front Range. 5, the Southwest. 4, Boise. 3, Montana. 2, Eastern Idaho. 1, Salt Lake City. And now the honest part, because you deserve it straight. Yellowstone is not erupting. It is not overdue. The overwhelming likelihood is that every single person watching this lives a full life, and their children live full lives, and that caldera never does anything but boil hot springs for tourists. So why does this list matter today? Because the eruption is the only part of this that's hypothetical. Everything else on that list is already true. The Colorado is already overpromised and undersupplied. The Great Salt Lake is already shrinking. Salt Lake City is already dependent on a single snowpack. The Pacific Northwest is already tied to dams on a river fed by Yellowstone. Those cities are already carrying almost no buffer, right now, on an ordinary Tuesday. Which means it doesn't take a supervolcano to run this scenario. A bad drought year runs a slower version of it. A big wildfire in the wrong watershed runs a version of it. Ash is just the fastest way to expose a system that was already stretched to the line. The volcano is a stress test. The fragility is not a forecast. It's the current condition. So go back to that wooden sign in the pines, the one the tour buses roll past on the way to Old Faithful. We read it as trivia, a photo stop, a fact about geography. It isn't trivia. It's a plumbing diagram for a third of a continent, and it happens to be bolted to the top of a supervolcano. Every river on this list starts within sight of it. Every city on this list was built downhill from it by people who assumed the water would simply keep arriving. So tell me in the comments. Before this video, did you know your tap traced back to Yellowstone? And if the water in your city ran gray tomorrow morning, how many days do you honestly think your household would last? Subscribe if you want more of these, because we take the threats sitting quietly under the places people call home and follow them all the way downstream, long before they ever reach the headlines. The water is always moving. The only question is, who's standing at the bottom of the hill?